The driver slammed the bus door shut with a hiss and muttered under his breath, "Damn mud again!" Tires squealed. Exhaust coughed into the air, and the vehicle rolled away, leaving a single dog sitting at the edge of the cracked pavement as though he were carved from stone. His name was Kalo, a black-furred shepherd mix with streaks of gray at his muzzle and a gaze that followed each departing bus like it carried the world he was waiting to reclaim. He did not chase the wheels, did not bark or whine. He simply sat, motionless, watchful, unyielding. The town had grown used to him, but not without irritation. Vendors cursed when he blocked the path, children threw pebbles to test his patience, and late-night drunks stumbled past him with mocking whistles. Yet no one had ever seen him bare his teeth or lift a paw in aggression. He was there every morning before the first bus, and still there long after the last headlights faded into the night. Day after day, week after week, the same quiet vigil at the same weather-worn bench. On that particular evening, the rain came early. The streetlights flickered through sheets of drizzle, blurring the rusting sign that read Route 47. Commuters hurried with umbrellas, their shoes slapping puddles, their voices muffled by the storm. Only Kalo remained unbothered, the drops soaking into his coat until it clung heavy against his ribs. He blinked slowly, head lifting each time the screech of brakes echoed from the main road. Hope flaring in his eyes, only to collapse back into stillness when the doors opened and closed without revealing whoever it was he longed to see. Lena Varma, a florist whose shop faced the terminal, watched him with a frown pressed deep into her forehead. She had fed him scraps before, and he had accepted them politely, but never with the joy of a hungry stray. It was as if food was not the reason he stayed. That evening, as the rain thickened, she stepped outside with a shawl drawn tight across her shoulders. She approached him slowly, crouched low, and whispered, "You'll drown yourself out here, old boy. Come inside." Kalo turned his head, met her eyes, and then looked back down the road as though her words had drifted through him without meaning. Something in that look unsettled her, a quiet refusal that carried more weight than stubbornness. She sighed and left him, returning to her shop, but her heart didn't rest. By nightfall, the bus stop was deserted. The last bus screeched to a halt, doors folding open with a metallic sigh. Commuters spilled out, damp and weary, none paying attention to the silent guardian at the bench. Then, for the first time in months, Kalo stood. His ears pricked, tail lifting slightly, and his body quivered with a sudden current of anticipation. But, as the last passenger stepped off, a stranger with an umbrella and tired eyes, the hope drained from him like a candle snuffed by the wind. He lowered himself back down and pressed his chest to the wet concrete. Lena had been watching from her window, and the sight pulled her outside again. She couldn't understand why this animal, who endured hunger and weather without complaint, had risen only to collapse into something that looked like grief. "Who are you waiting for?" she whispered, almost afraid of her own question. That night the rumor spread. A taxi driver claimed the dog once belonged to a homeless man who disappeared months ago. A cleaner at the depot swore she saw Kalo follow a soldier onto a bus and never see him return. Children whispered stories that he was cursed, bound to wait until his true master appeared. The stories gave the dog a legend, but no answers. The next morning, as dawn peeled a pale light over the town, Kalo was there again. His fur still damp, his eyes still sharp on the road. This time, a group of workers gathered near the stop, muttering about calling animal control. "He's in the way, and he's not leaving," one said. "Something's wrong with that dog." But Lena stepped in, her voice firm. "He's not dangerous. Just leave him." She didn't know why she defended him, only that there was something sacred in his waiting, something no net or leash should break. And yet, as the first bus of the day groaned to a halt, the driver leaned out, face red with irritation, and shouted, "If that beast doesn't move, I'll run him over next time. Mark my words." His voice cracked against the morning air, sharp enough to draw every eye. Kalo didn't flinch. He only shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the bus door with such intensity that a chill rippled through the crowd. For a breathless second, it felt as though he knew something none of them did, as if the answer to his silent vigil was closer than they dared to imagine. But when the doors closed and the bus pulled away, Kalo remained, silent, soaked, unbroken. And for the first time, even the ones who mocked him felt an unease settle in their chests. Whoever he was waiting for, it was not just an owner. It was someone who carried a truth that would not let him leave. The following morning carried the heavy silence of a town that had begun to wrestle with its own conscience. People passed the bus stop with quicker steps now, no longer laughing at the dog who refused to move. Carlo's vigil had taken on a weight no one wanted to name, but none could ignore. Even the children who once pelted him with stones now walked in uneasy circles around him, stealing guilty glances at his soaked fur and steady eyes. Something about the way he sat, unwavering and certain, made them feel as though they were intruding on a sacred act. Lena, restless from the night before, carried a bowl of warm milk and a cloth to dry him. She found him in the same place, staring at the same stretch of road, the faintest tremor in his body betraying exhaustion. She set the bowl near his paws, but he didn't lower his head. Instead, his ears twitched at the rumble of an approaching engine. The 710 bus screeched to a stop, doors folding open with a gasp of hydraulics. Passengers spilled out, and for an instant, Carlo's posture straightened, eyes alive with expectation. But again, no one familiar stepped down. His body sagged, and only then did he lap at the milk, half-heartedly, as if sustenance mattered less than the possibility of reunion. Lena crouched beside him, gently pressing the cloth against his wet fur. "Who left you here?" she murmured. "And why can't you let go?" Her words were swallowed by the roar of departing buses, yet the question seemed to echo in the morning air, unanswered and unsettling. By midday, the gossip had turned sharper. A uniformed officer who often took his lunch at the depot mentioned overhearing a story weeks ago. A man in a faded military jacket boarding the Route 47 bus, with the dog following at his heels. The man had stopped at the door, given Carlo a long look, and shaken his head. The dog had been shoved back gently, told to wait. Then the doors had closed, and the bus had taken him away. No one had rain hammered harder that night, turning the bus stop into a pool of trembling reflections. The metal bench glistened under the dim streetlight, its glow bending across the puddles. Carlo remained there, body curled yet eyes wide open, refusing to surrender to exhaustion. The storm only made his silhouette sharper, like a statue carved out of devotion. But devotion to what, or to whom, was the question that haunted Lena more with each passing day. She couldn't sleep. At midnight she pulled on her boots and crossed the street, her umbrella fighting the wind. She found him exactly where she knew he would be, shivering but unbroken. "You'll die out here," she murmured, kneeling beside him. She laid a hand against his soaked fur, and for the first time, Carlo let her touch linger. His ribs rose and fell under her palm, fragile yet steady. Then, just as quickly, he shifted his gaze back to the dark road as though reminding her, "This isn't about you." The following morning, whispers buzzed through the terminal like insects. Someone had nailed a weathered photograph to the bus stop pole. It showed a young man in a faded jacket, broad smile, and one arm slung around Carlo's neck. Beneath it, scribbled in smudged ink, were the words, "Have you seen Amir? Last taken bus Route 47, 3 months ago." Lena froze at the sight. Amir, a name, a face. The pieces began to form, though nothing yet made sense. The townsfolk gathered around, muttering. He was a student, wasn't he? Came here for work. No, he was a soldier. I remember his uniform. Stories tangled together, truth buried in half-memories and speculation. Yet Carlo's steady vigil gave weight to all of them. Whatever Amir had been, he was the reason the dog endured this endless wait. That evening, a twist cut through the routine. The 5th bus screeched into the stop, its doors sliding open. A man stumbled down, clutching a cane, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hood. Carlo shot up with a sharp bark, his entire body trembling as if struck by lightning. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, and for a moment even Lena's breath caught in her throat. Was this Amir? But when the man lifted his head, his eyes were clouded, unfamiliar, lost in their own darkness. Carlo froze, bark breaking into a low whine, then sank back down as though the hope had been ripped straight from his chest. The crowd laughed nervously, shaking off the tension. "Just some stranger," someone muttered, but Lena saw the pain etched into the dog's stance, the way he had risen with unshakable faith only to collapse under the weight of disappointment. Something in her hardened. That night, after locking her shop, she sat near Carlo, clutching the photograph in her hand. "Tell me," she whispered into the rain, "what happened to him? Why hasn't he come back?" Her voice cracked, not just with sympathy for the dog but with a gnawing ache she didn't want to name. Maybe it was because she knew what it was to wait for someone who never returned. The next day brought another revelation. An old conductor, hunched and sour-faced, recognized the photo. "I remember that boy," he grunted, his eyes darting away. "Took the bus one morning, left the dog right here. Said he'd be back on the evening route. Never saw him again." His tone was dismissive, but there was something buried in it, a shadow of guilt or fear. Lena's chest tightened. Kalo had not misunderstood. He wasn't a stray lost in habit. He was waiting for a promise that had been broken. The dog's refusal to leave wasn't madness. It was loyalty, carved deeper than reason. But why had Amir never returned? By dusk, tension gripped the town. More people lingered near the stop, drawn not just by pity but by the eerie gravity of the mystery. Kalo sat straighter than ever, eyes fierce on the horizon, as if the answer might finally appear. Lena stood nearby, shawl pulled close, heart pounding. Every engine that rumbled down the road made her tense. Every brake squeal snapped her breath in half. And then, as the seventh bus of the night pulled in, something unusual happened. The driver, a younger man new to the route, hesitated when he spotted Kalo. His hands froze on the wheel, and his face turned pale. He whispered something under his breath before forcing the doors open. No one else noticed, but Lena did. She stepped forward, demanding, "You know this dog, don't you?" The driver's eyes flickered to the photo nailed to the pole, then back to Kalo, who now stood rigid as stone. "I've seen him before," the driver muttered. "That day. The boy, Amir. He never got off my bus." The words struck like thunder, and silence fell heavy across the terminal. Kalo whined, as if he understood the truth had finally started to surface, and Lena felt her stomach twist with a fear she hadn't been ready to confront. This wasn't a story about waiting anymore. This was a story about someone who never came back, and the reason why might be darker than anyone wanted to believe. Rain hammered the roof of the terminal that evening, turning gutters into rivers and the street into a mirror of restless headlights. Kalo sat unmoved beneath the flickering bus stop lamp, his silhouette sharp against the storm. People rushed past him, their coats pulled tight, their shoes splashing through puddles. But in his eyes there was only the road, only the faint glimmer of headlights that seemed to pull him into a world no one else could see. Lena stood at her shop window again, her hand gripping the curtain. She had promised herself she wouldn't get involved, that she'd let the dog be. Yet something about the way he endured, the hunger, the weather, the scorn, kept her awake at night. That evening she decided to try one last time. Wrapping a scarf around her shoulders, she stepped into the storm and crossed to the bus stop. "Come on, Kalo," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "Whoever you're waiting for isn't coming." But Kalo did something he had never done before. He turned to her, his eyes burning with an intensity that startled her breath short, and then he looked back toward the road with a low whine, as though begging her to understand. For the first time, Lena didn't see a stray. She saw a secret carried in silence. Just then, the brakes of the night bus shrieked. Its doors yawned open, spilling a handful of passengers into the rain. Kalo shot to his feet, every muscle taut, his tail rigid with anticipation. He leaned forward, eyes scanning each face. A man in a raincoat, a woman clutching groceries, a teenager with headphones, but no one that broke his vigil. The spark in his eyes dimmed, his shoulders sagged, and he sank back into the water pooling at the curb. Lena felt her throat tighten. Something inside that animal cracked open the quiet grief she carried herself, the memory of her father, a bus driver who never came home one winter night after a crash on Route 47. For years, she had hated bus stops, hated the sound of air brakes, hated waiting for anyone. And now, here was this dog, showing her what it meant to wait without giving up. The following day, word spread faster than usual. The driver who had threatened Kalo told the story in the depot's break room, twisting it into something darker. "That dog's not right," he said. "He waits like he knows something, like he's cursed. You'll see." His words traveled down the line, whispered among passengers, until even strangers passing the stop slowed their steps, uneasy under the weight of Kalo's silent devotion. By evening, a small crowd had gathered. Some threw scraps to test him. Others pulled out phones to capture the strange ritual of a dog staring at buses. And then the twist came, sharp and unsettling. One of the older men in the crowd, a retired conductor named Balan, narrowed his eyes as he studied Kalo. "I know this dog," he said, voice cutting through the chatter. He belonged to Captain Arav Senin, the soldier who never came back from the last deployment. A hush rippled through the bystanders. Lena's head snapped toward the old man. "How can you be sure?" "I remember," Balin said firmly. "Arav used to take this very bus every morning at dawn. That dog was always with him, right there by his side. The day Arav left, he boarded the bus in uniform. The dog tried to follow, but he was pushed back. He sat at the stop then, just like now, watching until the bus disappeared. And when Arav didn't return, the dog never left." The words struck the crowd silent, but they struck Lena harder. She felt the ground tilt beneath her as she looked at Kalo again. Suddenly, his stillness was not stubbornness. It was loyalty turned into stone, a loyalty that had outlived months of storms, hunger, and loneliness. That night, she lay awake listening to the rain against her window. In her mind replayed the image of the soldier, the bus, the dog left behind. Something inside her shifted. A quiet anger at the cruelty of fate, but also a reverence for the creature who refused to betray memory. She realized that Kalo wasn't lost. He was the last keeper of someone else's promise. The next morning, when Lena opened her shop, Kalo was there as always. But now the people who passed him no longer muttered curses. They stopped, they stared, and some even lowered their heads as if in respect. The bus stop had become something more than cracked pavement and a rusting bench. It had become a place where grief and loyalty met, a place where truth waited in silence. And though Lena still didn't know how his vigil would end, she felt certain of one thing. Kalo's story was far from finished, and when the truth revealed itself fully, it would shake more than just the quiet rhythm of the town. It would force them all to reckon with what it means to love, to lose, and to wait. Morning broke with a fragile kind of light. The sky painted in pale gold after a long night of storms. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth, and for the first time in days, the road gleamed clean, as though the rain had washed away not just dust but secrets waiting to be told. Kalo was there, exactly where he had always been, his black coat glistening damp in the soft sun. But something in his stillness felt different, as though this morning carried weight that none of them could yet name. Lena walked across the street with a flask of warm milk in her hands, determined to sit beside him. She no longer tried to coax him away. She had come to understand that his place wasn't chosen lightly. Settling onto the weathered bench, she let the silence stretch between them. "I don't know if anyone else believes it," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I believe you know something we don't, and I'll wait with you today." The dog flicked his ears, his eyes never leaving the road, and for the first time, he leaned just slightly against her leg. The first bus of the day arrived with its usual hiss and groan, spilling out commuters wrapped in their routines. Kalo stood, eyes burning with the same unwavering intensity. People paused, watching him with a reverence that hadn't been there before. The old conductor Balin was among them, his voice low but firm. "He knows. Dogs don't wait this long unless their hearts are bound to someone." His words carried through the crowd, softening faces, pulling silence from chatter. And then it happened. The next bus pulled in, its brakes screeching against the fresh morning air. As the doors opened, a man in uniform stepped down slowly, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was lean, marked with lines of exhaustion and survival, but his eyes, dark, searching, alive, swept across the stop with urgency. The world seemed to narrow in that instant, time folding in on itself. Kalo let out a sound none of them had heard before, a broken, shuddering cry, half bark, half sob. He launched forward, his body trembling as he pressed against the man's legs, burying his head into the fabric of his uniform as though no force on earth could pull him away again. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths, others simply frozen where they stood. The soldier dropped his cane and fell to his knees, arms wrapping tight around the dog. Tears cut down his dirt-streaked face, his voice shaking as he whispered into Kalo's fur. "You waited for me. All this time. My boy, you waited." Lena felt her chest break open at the sight. Months of silence, hunger, storms, and doubt, all for this single moment of reunion. The dog had never been lost, never been abandoned. He had been waiting, carrying faith where others carried skepticism. And now, against the weight of disbelief, that faith had been answered. The soldier, Arav Sen, now alive before them, looked up at the faces gathered, his voice hoarse. They told me he wouldn't survive without me, but I knew him. I knew he would wait. His words trembled, not in pride, but in awe, the kind of awe reserved for love that refuses to die, even when the world insists it should. The bus driver who once threatened to run Kalo over lowered his gaze, shame etched across his features. Vendors who had cursed him wiped their eyes. Children who had once thrown pebbles stood quiet, their small hands curled tight with a new understanding. And Lena, standing there with her heart heavy and light at once, realized that she had witnessed not just loyalty, but the proof of something people rarely dared to believe in anymore, the possibility of love unbroken by absence. Kalo didn't leave Arav's side again. As the soldier rose slowly with his cane, the dog pressed close against his leg, guiding him step for step. Together they crossed the street, leaving the bus stop behind. But it was no longer just a corner of cracked pavement and rusting benches. From that day forward, it became a place marked by their story, a place where people paused, lowered their voices, and remembered what it meant to be steadfast. Lena returned to her shop, her hands trembling as she placed the untouched flask of milk on the counter. She felt as though she had been changed in ways too quiet to explain, as though the dog's vigil had taught her something she hadn't known she was missing. That waiting, however painful, was not weakness. It was a kind of strength, a declaration that some bonds defy time, storms, even death itself. The town never forgot the sight of that reunion. Some told the story with tears, others with reverence, but all with the same awe. And in the quiet hours, when buses still came and went, people often swore they could see the ghost of a black dog at the stop, sitting tall, as if reminding them that loyalty is not a myth, but a truth waiting at the edge of the road. And for Lena, each time she heard the hiss of brakes outside her shop, she found herself pausing, not with dread as she once had, but with gratitude, because she had seen it with her own eyes, the kind of waiting that doesn't end in despair, but in a homecoming so powerful it leaves the world forever altered.